Wait.
Filmmakers, writers, actors, creators, entertainers, and players. We all have a unique story. This talk show hopes to unearth a few hidden stories and inspire new ones. I'm Nikhil, an engineer who found his calling in the creative space, and I believe each of us has a unique, fascinating, unrepeatable, and unpredictable journey.
I've got Denny Thomas with me. So he's a Emmy award-winning editor, the Peabody, the American Cinema Editors Eddie Award. Then he has been working with Vice Media. He's got a show on Netflix called Explained. Other creds include being a sound mixer, being a DP, and also a producer. Other than these qualifications, which are there for all to see, since I know you personally, I would definitely say you're a wonderful singer and somebody who's taught me the little guitar that I know. So thank you so much for joining me on this conversation, Denny.
Thank you for that introduction.
You're going to spend the evening tonight with us, and you're going to be wearing a uniform.
We are about to spend the night in the jail. Nothing's allowed in, all jewelry off, hairbands, everything that could potentially be used as a weapon.
Journey, it's so fascinating to me that you were an Ajay a long time back. Then you went and studied in the States. Then you got into editing. So this roadmap that you had, is this something that you planned it through, or is it something that happened one after the other?
So the intention of wanting to work in films, especially, even though I work in television mostly, the intention to work in films is something that I had since my undergrad degree, undergrad days in Delhi University. I was an English major, and by the time I was in my end of second year, beginning of third year, we all had this moral dilemma, this existential crisis of what we are going to do with our English degrees. Because I clearly did not want to teach, but there are not a lot of avenues open to people who just get a degree in English literature. And so a lot of my friends were actually thinking about writing for magazines. And there were some who were really interested in getting into advertising. And one of my favorite professors at that time was a big film buff. And she had, apart from classes, she would just encourage us to watch really good cinema. And I remember one time she invited us over to her home, and she made us watch Pulp Fiction and Apocalypse Now. And while I was watching those movies, I realized that this is what I wanted to do with my life. That's the career path I wanted to take. But it's not very easy to do that while you live in India. Even though we make the most amount of movies in a year, it's not a very streamlined process of how you can get into the industry. A lot of people just gave me the advice that you have to move to Bombay and struggle. And I did not understand what that meant. Because there should be a pathway. There should be a roadmap you can follow if you want to get into an industry, like there are for most industries. For example, if you want to be a civil engineer, you can go ahead and get an engineering degree. And that's why I wanted to study films before I actually moved to Bombay or even thought about it. But we only have the Film and Television Institute of India. And for that, I moved to Pune, and I applied twice to try and get into that school. But because of the population that we have in India, how many people apply to study at FTII, and because of the solid competition that is there, I was not able to make it in either of those years. At the same time, I was doing other jobs. I was working in BPOs because pretty much that was the only thing I was qualified to do with my English degree. That's about the time when I participated in a contest held by Radio Mirchi, and I became a radio jockey. And at the same time, I got my master's in English literature, just because I wanted to do something besides working. And after 2.5 years of working in radio, I had a friend who had moved to Texas, to the University of North Texas, to study business management. And I was talking to her one fine day, and she mentioned that the school has a film program, and she asked me if I was interested to apply for it, and I did. And the school was surprisingly very happy to have me, and they gave me a bunch of scholarships so I could afford it. And that's how I went to how I came to the US, and I studied at the University of North Texas, after which I moved to New York, armed with actually the knowledge of filmmaking. And I was able to do a lot of different things. I did some production, I did sound mixing, and I did camera work and editing as well. And very quickly I realized that my interest lies in editing, and my passion is to edit, writing and editing. So editing was the path that I chose for myself, and I've been doing that for about 6 years now.
So currently, where exactly, which kind of work are you doing? What kind of work are you editing? If you can just share about that.
Sure. Right now I'm working on a series for History Channel. It's the second season for the series. It's called Unidentified. It's about the US military and the Pentagon's investigation into UFOs. So basically it's talking to a lot of military professionals who have seen unidentified flying objects, and just a show that is trying to answer the question, have we been visited by intelligent life? And if we have, why is nobody talking about it?
It seemed to be aware that we were there.
For the first time, government insiders reveal their UFO investigation,
Rapidly accelerates beyond anything that I've ever seen.
uncovering what fighter pilots and radar operators see in our skies
We're all amazed at how fast this thing just took off and disappeared.
and under our oceans.
According to one of the sonar guys, they were going 70 knots under the water.
If these things are hostile, then we're screwed.
Unidentified, Friday, May 31st at 10.
Since you have worked on a lot of documentaries over there, I just wanted to understand, when you've got an episode to edit, does the director kind of tell you, does he give you like a structure of how the messaging needs to come through, or do you play around with it first and then he gives feedback? How does that process work?
So there are both kinds. There are projects and producers and directors that you work with, and shows that you work with, which are very scripted, where it's very easy for you to turn around an episode. And the example for that I would give would be the show Explained on Netflix. It is very well written. It's scripted to the T. So there is not a lot of searching for a story that I have to do as an editor. But then on the other hand, there are shows like Vice, which I worked on for 5 years, which was on HBO. And in that show, it's very hard to write that show because it is dealing with current events, and it's dealing with stories such as a lot of stories from war zones, for example, stories from the areas of conflict, where when the producer and the team goes out into the field, they go out with an idea that this is what we want to cover. We want to cover ISIS in Syria. We want to cover what is happening with the missile program in North Korea. And things like that, which you cannot write down because you can't script it. You can't plan it. You can just do the bare minimum. You can go there and see what you can find. But we still need to make a story. So you have to find the story in this 60 gigabytes of footage that we've shot. So in shows like that, I had a lot of freedom and a lot of creative input that I had, because I had to just parse the whole footage to find the story.
We've just got to the city of Aleppo, which has had several hundred mortars falling over the last couple of days. The whole of Aleppo is essentially a front line. There's a sniper down there. Go, go, go.
هني غلطوا وهني حيتحملوا المسؤولية. بشار الأسد للأبد، إن شاء من شاء والأبد الأبد.
Believe it or not, we are actually in Syria. Is it a little bit strange at all that all these people are here on the Mediterranean, and at the same time we've got Russian fighter jets flying over us, and there's fighting going on around the rest of the country?
غريب من الناحية أي ناحية غريب، ليس غريب في ذلك.
When, for instance, you cover an episode on the ISIS and the operations there, it's similar to, it is the news, right? So are you thinking whether I am coloring the audience with my perception, or is your responsibility only to represent what is captured, or does this make sense to you? Like,
Yes,
does that conflict happen?
I understand. So I have worked on straight up news as well as documentary, and that is the difference between the two. When you're doing news, you are very objective, and you are presenting the story and trying not to let your opinion color it. And that is what straight up reporting is basically. And documentary has more of a leeway because you're still making a film and you are very clear on which side you're taking. And so as an audience member, you are not going to watch it and feel like, oh, they are trying to influence me towards this idea, because that is basically the understanding that you should have when you're watching a documentary, that yes, I am going to be influenced because they've made this film to influence me in a particular direction. But what we are trying not to do is trying to force you into it. We are giving you the facts. We are not twisting the facts. We're not manipulating them. But yes, clearly we have as documentary filmmakers, we have a bias, and we are open about it when we are making the film, because that is why we made the film.
In this 6 years that you've been actively working as an editor, and your career before that, if you could just share 2 or 3 pieces of work that you are most proud of, you really enjoyed doing, which ones would those be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really enjoyed a film that we made in North Korea. When I was working at Vice was one of the only media organizations which had access to go to North Korea, because the North Korean regime is very strict about letting Western journalists in. And they had been, if not happy, they had been okay with Vice coming in. And so in just about the year 2016, 2017, when Donald Trump was elected president, and he was picking a fight with North Korea, which is not a great idea because North Korea really does not care. And North Korea had started talking about the intercontinental ballistic missiles that it was developing, which could destroy America, which could at least hit America. And so the war of words on both sides was really heating up. At that time, Vice was allowed by the North Korean government to come in and film. So our team went in and shot for just about 4 days, and then brought back all this footage. And they did not get the story that they wanted at all. They wanted to be able to talk to people in government. They wanted to be able to get a good answer from people over there about whether they have these missiles and what their intentions are. But basically, the North Korean government took them on a pre-planned tour, showing them the beautiful gardens that they have, the subway system that they have, and the school where there are 6-year-old children who are musical prodigies, and a musical theater performance. So it was absolutely different from what we had intended to shoot. And so I get this footage back, and there's 5 days of footage, 4 to 5 days of footage. And we still have to make a film, but we're not going to make a propaganda film for North Korea, because all they showed us was how amazing everything is, how happy people are. So I found it a lot of fun to cut this really blustery footage from North Korea and intercut it with actual news headlines where everybody in the world is afraid that we are all going to die because North Korea is going to launch a nuclear weapon. And to play around with those two ideas was a lot of fun. So that is one that was one that I was very proud of.
Did you get a mail from the North Korean president after that?
I did not, no.
원수들이 정신에 100마리의 핵폭탄을 터뜨린 것보다 더 무서운 절벽을 남긴
They woke us up at 4 a.m. after no prior warning. They took our phones away. We have very little idea of what's going on from an outside perspective, hour by hour, but the people here have even less idea. What's the significance of the rocket? That one's a submarine-launched ballistic missile. Stay please.
만일 미국이 무한 도발을 걸어온다면 미 혁명무력은 즉시 선멸적인 타격을 가할 것이며 전면 전쟁으로 핵 전쟁에는 미식의 핵 타격전으로 대응할 것입니다.
I'm having a complete sensory overload. I don't know whether to laugh or cry or be scared or entertain.
This is a very American, a very domestic story. It was about, it's called Charlottesville, Race and Terror. It's on YouTube. In 2016, 2017, there was white nationalists, white supremacists in America were organizing a rally in a small town called Charlottesville, where they were going to come together and march. They're basically neo-Nazis. And so there were people who were protesting them as well, who were anti-white nationalism. And a conflict occurred between them. One woman was killed because a white nationalist ran her over with a car. And that story was special because our team was the only team on the ground there. So we shot this footage while we were shooting it here sitting in Brooklyn. Our news gathering team and our documentary team realized that this is very, very important footage that we have to turn around very quickly. So while my team was shooting in Charlottesville, we are back here editing this film, me and three other editors, and we had to turn it around very quickly, and in 24 hours we put it on TV. And it was one of the highest viewed things that I've done, and it was covered by all the other major media outlets, and it was responsible for the team getting multiple Emmy awards and Peabody's and American Cinema Editors Award for the editing for that. And another one that I'm really proud about is last August I cut a piece for Explained, which is on Netflix, which was about pandemics. And in August, this piece aired in October of last year. Pandemics Explained, which had Bill Gates, and he was talking about how if we get a pandemic,
Right.
we're not prepared at all. And in November, coronavirus hit, and so it was interesting to see a lot of text messages from people that I know who were sharing the video and were calling me up and telling me you were just talking about this and now it's happening. So there's another one on Netflix right now, which is Coronavirus Explained. I would tell everybody to watch that. It's very good reporting.
Have you worked on that one as well?
Yes.
Many who work in infectious disease knew a pandemic like this was coming.
If a really fast-moving respiratory pathogen came out, we wouldn't be able to hold those numbers down.
Could it be a coronavirus again? Certainly.
We didn't think it would be able to get into people. It didn't look like it was a clear and present danger. Unfortunate.
For a disease to become a pandemic, it has to find an extraordinary balance. So where does this current pandemic fall?
So the most significant diseases often cause symptoms like coughing and fever that could be confused with other diseases.
That's what makes this coronavirus so devious. Of all the viruses out there, why did this one end up becoming the kind of pandemic we haven't seen in more than a century? And how does a pandemic like this end?
Right now, or somebody you looked up to, who would be a few of the people in the creative space whose work you look up to and you're influenced by?
Joe Walker is an excellent editor who I've had the pleasure of meeting as well. He edits a lot of Denis Villeneuve films. He did Blade Runner recently, and so he does a lot of films, and he was a real pleasure to meet. In terms of filmmakers, Martin Scorsese is obviously a legend. There's just so many.
What is it about his work that you think sets him apart or speaks to you?
I think I'm very interested in dialogue. When I see narrative films, I am really pulled towards the dialogue writing, because besides editing, which is what I do right now for work, a passion of mine is to, and an ambition of mine is to be a screenwriter. So I really like well-written movies, and I think that is what draws me a lot to Martin Scorsese's work, that he does not have to do a lot to draw your attention. It can be just two people sitting in a room for 10-15 minutes and just having a conversation, and it's just the way that he writes it, the realism and the just there's a lot of power behind the way he writes a scene, and that's I think what draws me towards Scorsese's work.
And the editor of Blade Runner,
Joe Walker, I just like him because he was a really nice person when I met him. He's a very good editor as well, but I was just amazed by how this guy has he has won Oscars, and he was such an amazing person, and I think he's a fantastic editor as well. But that's kind of why I think of him, because I got to spend some time with him personally.
Sure. So you just mentioned about screenwriting for a second. So what is your plan of action from here? How do you want to move in your creative journey? Which all pit stops do you see that you'd like to touch upon?
So I write as a passion, as a hobby, and I am very interested in television writing right now. And so I have, on my own time, this is not for work, this is just as a personal exercise, I've written a pilot for a drama series and for a comedy. And what I would like to do someday is be able to, one thing that I would start this with is by saying that it's writing a good story, writing a good screenplay, I feel is just 40% of the battle. 60% is how to sell it. And I feel like I've learned how to write it. I can't call myself a writer, but I don't know how to sell it. So that is something that I have to research, how to get it in front of the right people. There are screenwriting contests that happen, competitions that happen in here, and you can submit your screenplay for that. And if it places in a good position, then it's a good way to get it in front of people who can help you further it. For example, agents. So I think that is what I have to figure out next, how to get it in front of people.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm really enjoying editing. I like to work on as many different types of projects that I can. So currently I work independently. So every few months I can choose what kind of project I want to jump on.
Just maybe finishing off, a couple of more things that I just wanted to prick your brain with. One is, so you were saying that you've written a few screenplays. So how much time did it take for you to write that pilot and basically get that structure in place? How much time did it take for you?
I think that process went on for a very long time because there were rewrites and rewrites. But the first draft, I think I was able to do in 1 week because the story was right there. I think it might have been even fewer the days because I remember there was a time when I was spending 10, 12 hours just writing and then editing it down. And and then there were multiple rewrites. I'm a member of a group here in New York called the New York Screenwriters Collective, where we meet once a month and we read a screenplay that one of the members has written. And we offer creative criticism. I felt that it was extremely valuable because you can always ask your friends to read it, but they're always going to come back and say, this is so good. But if you actually show it to people who are in the industry or who are at the same point as yourself, who are trying to break into the industry, and if they read it, and I thought that their feedback was invaluable to me.
Right. So yeah, amazing. I think Denny, I hope to see many more works of yours. I hope to see a show that you are the showrunner, as they say it when you write it, and comes through soon.